everyone, and welcome back to ABH, Making a Difference in Mental Health. I am your host, Danielle Young, and we are in a new series for the month of August. This month's theme, we're actually really reflecting on the impact of COVID-19 and the school and education system. So our theme for this month is COVID-19 and education. What happened? Today we have a special guest with us, Ms. Stephanie Nelson Butler, who is a behavioral health therapist for Advanced Behavioral Health, but her first career was actually in the school system. Stephanie served as a professional school counselor for 6 years and an English teacher for 13 years, which is pretty much a combination of 2 decades in the education system. Wow, Stephanie, that is a lot of service, and I'm sure that you'll be able to give us insight today. But before we start, I always have to say hey to my co-host. Hey, Wendy, how you doing?
Hey, Danielle, how you doing? Welcome, Stephanie. Welcome, audience. We're so happy to have you here having this conversation with us today.
Thank you both.
Stephanie, we'd like for you to kind of take us back a little bit, if you can, to that space and time when you were a teacher, an English teacher, as well as a professional school counselor, but kind of put yourself in the position of COVID-19 right when it hit between 2019 and 2020, when we began to hear about COVID, and then when it certainly impacted the school system. What do you think the teachers were thinking when it first began, and then as it continued along? What is your thought, or do you have any insight of possibly what that was like for the teachers?
I think as educational staff, we thought how amazing it was that in our minds, students were so computer savvy and how they were so adept at texting. And we just, in our minds, thought, oh, they're going to transition really well. But what we found out is that the whole texting and computer world that students are in, it made them less and less able to relate to each other, as well as to the adults in their lives. There are several computer programs that students were using already. For example, educational opportunities to be able to do work via the computer to recover credits, but they weren't on Zoom, and basically it was at their own pace. So I think the really big point that we saw was that students were not able to use Zoom very well.
So was there, Stephanie, do you think a lack of training on the school system's part? Or, I hear that what you're saying, that there's the assumption that because of social media and, kids are really adept to using social media and using computers and technology, that Zoom would be simple.
I think we assumed that. And even for adults, it was something new. And I've heard some of my colleagues say to me, they weren't prepared, they weren't trained very well. And teachers are expected in the classroom to engage students in a way by coming up with very creative ideas, being very active, almost on stage. That's one of the terms that is called being on stage. And so it was very hard for some colleagues to transition to being on Zoom and giving that same amount of energy to students to keep them engaged.
I mean, it's a different world to do it through a computer as opposed to when you're standing up in front of a classroom with live bodies, being able to engage and have those conversations personally. So sitting through COVID and watching the struggles that teachers had, I don't think teachers got a lot of credit, because you eloquently explained how difficult it is to, be on stage through a computer and have people engaged in learning through a computer. So
you're exactly right. You are exactly right. And many of the students, because of their lack of engagement, didn't come to classes. And I think at first it was a requirement to open your camera. Well, for high school students, the requirement kind of slipped away because it was a balance. Come to class and not open your camera, or open your camera and just not come to class. So that requirement kind of slipped away. So many of the students came to class, but they didn't open their cameras. So consequently, they're not seeing each other. They're not looking at each other's body language. The teacher is just talking to a screen of closed cameras, so you don't know what the students are doing.
Right. Do you think that kind of happened more and more as time went by? Because initially, I think, every teenager I know personally was ecstatic that they didn't have to like get on a school bus or get in a car and, be in the school building, that they could actually do it from home. And so I think everybody had this perception that it was just going to be so easy and so convenient. And, we noticed in the practice as well how kids started not showing up for our sessions and ghosting us, as they say, because they got tired of being on a screen. It didn't feel good, I think, is what was happening.
Yep, that's a really good point, Wendy. And I think eventually it did get to be that way. When I was in the classroom, and it's sort of like haunting me now, but I remember telling students how, because they were off task and their behavior was so crazy and they weren't listening and being disrespectful. And I remember telling a class that one day you're going to come into the room and a screen is going to come down and there's going to be your teacher on the screen versus a person standing here. So fast forward to when COVID happened, and I thought about the students that did not like to come to class, that wanted to stay home, didn't want to participate and didn't want to hear the teacher, etc. Now it should have been really easy for them because they didn't have to come out. They didn't have to put on clothes. They could just wear their pajamas if they wanted. But as you mentioned, Wendy, more and more of them became, I want to say, the depression started, and did not want to face that camera, even not being on camera. They just did not want to engage with the technology.
Right. There's something about that camera because, there are teens we deal with, younger people that we deal with that are very introverted, very shy,
Yes.
Don't like to be in the forefront, want to be in the background. And there's just something about that camera when you're on Zoom that created such anxiety for people. And it almost led to, depression because of how they feel. I guess they were being depicted on camera. So that's an interesting issue that I think a lot of people overlooked. Danielle, what do you think about that with the camera?
Well, I'm listening to Stephanie, and I'm just taking into account everything that you've said so far. You're talking about just a decrease in socialization with peers and with students and the teachers. You talked about there's a lack of training or preparation even for the teachers to be able to transition, and the students. And you even told us an interesting story about the teacher coming down on the screen, and it's the vice versa. It's the students that are on the screen. But I think it's really interesting. And as we segue from the students into maybe therapy, you say something about the impact of technology and being on Zoom and being on camera and anxiety provoking, and with the screens off versus screens being on, the depression setting in, or just this idea or this feeling, especially from maybe some of the clients that you've worked with, Stephanie, I know myself as well, of just feeling restlessness. So let's segue into those students who we also have as clients who may have also felt the same thing, the anxiety, the depression, the restlessness. They're not logging into our sessions either, or they're not showing themselves on the screen for our sessions either. So I think that it's this interesting COVID response, or the impact of COVID really has to do with the lack of socialization and the challenge with the students adjusting to being at home all day, adjusting to their entire routine, their daily routine of how they function as a student has been shifted and has been switched and flipped and changed till they're not getting what they would normally get. And because it's so concentrated at home, there's this energy or maybe lack thereof that's not being able to be dispensed because they're not in school anymore. So those are my thoughts. Stephanie, can you, from a therapeutic perspective now, give us some information on what have you observed or what have you encountered or experienced over the past year?
I have some clients who are school students, of course, and one of the things I find in common, especially with high schoolers, they socialize so much at school, and to be focused and have their world concentrated into their room or their living room or their dining room, they have almost shut down because there's no interaction. You can't really interact with your peers on the screen. And when COVID was at its height and we weren't allowed to really interact with anyone, even, with masks, I guess, some of the students just started to shut down because they were going from their bed to their desk, to their bed, to their desk. And that was just their world. They really became, like you said, tired of the computer. There was an article I read that talked about how adults, how we become mentally tired because we're looking at ourselves on Zoom as we're talking to our clients. So one of the suggestions was to take your camera off and just see the client or the other adult that you're talking to, because we get mentally tired. We're kind of self-assessing, and we're looking at every little pimple and bump and everything on ourselves, and so that could have been one of the things with the students too. They're constantly looking at themselves. It just became really, like as you said, just lack of energy being dispensed. And so I was encouraging my high schoolers to go outside. Just go, walk out to the sidewalk or walk to the end of your driveway or just sit outside and get some fresh air and get some vitamin D, because, you're just constantly sitting in the house looking at the screen.
That totally makes sense, Stephanie, in terms of the kids looking at themselves and on screen, and then like a constant reminder that I'm not doing so well in school right now. I'm not passing my courses. I'm struggling sitting there, and having to look at myself every day is a constant reminder. I know that we had conversations about exactly what you said. Start getting your clients to just go outside, get vitamin D, because the parents didn't understand how fatigued they were, how tired they were, that they were coming to us to fix their grades. And that was an impossible task because they had already given up and they were already tired of looking at the screen. So we kind of reversed course a little bit and just started pushing self-care. Like, you got to get out there, get some vitamin D, do something, do some exercising, because the students also missed their norms this year in 2020. Proms and graduation, I can totally speak to that. My child graduated during the COVID pandemic, so she didn't get a prom, she didn't get a formal graduation. I was able to keep her spirits up because I'm trained, but the average person struggled with that. Like, kids were getting depressed about not enjoying the typical norms of school as well, or participating in sports as well. So it was just super challenging all around 2020 with these kids that we serve in school, as well as, teachers. And, I kind of doubling back to the teacher, because the teachers had, to me, the weight of the world on their shoulders, because it's like a do or die kind of situation. If I don't go to school or I don't get on Zoom and teach, then I'm terrible.
Yes.
But at the same time, all the professionals were just recognizing how COVID impacted kids emotionally, and were fighting to get people to have schools reopen and kids back in school, but there was really a big safety issue still going on. We still are in COVID, and I think that's the mistake that everybody keeps making. This virus hasn't gone away; it's still here.
Yes.
And people, there are things that we can do to mitigate it, to make it so it's not as prominent, but we don't have everybody on board with that, and so it just becomes a big challenge. But definitely, loving that, adjusting for everyone was huge in 2020.
Yeah.
The kids, the parents, the therapists, we got tired of looking at the screen. we have subsequently moved forward and starting to see some of our clients in person, and that has made a big difference in the way we provide services. But everybody got tired. I think everybody just needs to, recognize that.
Yes, you were right, Wendy.
Right. And also, it's interesting, Stephanie, that you were telling some of your students and some of your clients, hey, get out and move. We just finished out our self-care series where one of the episodes was actually about movement. So I think that's something that we can definitely reiterate when we were talking about the exhaustion of the teachers, the concerns of the parents, the lack of norms for students. I think that we can start, as clinicians, as those who happen to also work with these students, we can start to give advice as we're transitioning into adjusting to the new norms of COVID-19 and how it has impacted us from the past and how we're moving forward with the new regulations and different adjustments and safety precautions. Stephanie, let's start talking about advice. What kind of advice would we want to give our listeners, whether it's teachers, whether they are parents, whether we happen to have students, whether it's college students or we have school-age students, elementary, middle, high school-age students who happen to be listening with their families, or also clinicians and other professionals. Let's talk about some advice we can give them as we go forward into the 2021-2022 school year.
Well, my thoughts, Danielle and Wendy, are, and I think the last series of podcasts talked about self-care. Self-care,
Yes.
self-care. We just can't talk about that enough. Also, for parents, I would say ease your children back into school because this is going to be a big adjustment going back in, just like it was an adjustment coming out. Some of our students are going to experience some issues such as anxiety. Listen to your child. And because the anxiety is real. It's going to be real going back in. And that's what I have been asking my clients. How do you think we can handle going back into the school system? What are some of your fears and concerns, and what things make you feel anxious? And I'm starting to work on that with them now because it's right around the corner. And there's still a lot of things up in the air. Children below 12 being vaccinated, that's still up in the air. We don't know. Wearing a mask all day, that's still something that is up in the air. So there are some issues and concerns that these students have, and their parents really, really need to have a third ear and listen to those things so that they can refer them for help. And then learn a couple of coping skills yourself, parents, so that you can start to work with your child too. One other thing, I think some of the clients that I have done so poorly last school year. So this school year, they are struggling with acceptance that I didn't do so well.
Good reflection.
Yes. So, just this morning, I had a client and we processed how she's going to have to repeat this school year coming. She's going to have to repeat. And so we're starting to kind of process that, talk about how it's going to look for her, what are her concerns about it, how she can maybe overcome some of the issues. And so that's something that is really high on my list.
That's good. And what about some advice for our teachers or professionals going back into the school system?
Like the students, some of the colleagues I've talked to have really, really big concerns because of the infrastructure of the school. The infrastructure was bad before. Now it's glaring. Some of those those problems are glaring. The school where I worked, I'm not going to say the name, was just the HVAC system was horrible, and just the thought of going back. And what's so coincidental for me is that I had already decided to leave the school system like a year before COVID hit. And once COVID hit, I didn't know whether to feel bad for my colleagues or to feel relieved for myself, because it just happened that way, that I left that same time, same school year. And I just thought about being in a school system, being in a building where the HVAC is not as efficient. You don't have a lot of ventilation, overcrowded classrooms. I could go on, but I'm not going to do that. So one of the things that I think is a real concern are the number of students in the classroom. And so I kind of thought about it, and I was hoping that even with the start of the school year, maybe the first semester could be hybrid and let, students kind of ease back in and let faculty and staff ease back in as well, to kind of allay some of the concerns until maybe second semester. I don't know. That's just something I was thinking about.
For me, it's patience. We've all gone through a trauma. We've all dealt with this deadly pandemic, and we continue to deal with this deadly pandemic. And I think it'd be remiss to make it such an easy topic to resolve. It is complex on all sides. Complex for students, complex for teachers, complex for therapists. It's a tough situation, and I don't know if there is a one right answer. The votes are in that definitely the social impact is huge for everyone. I think it's huge around safety too, because teachers want to be safe. They want to teach. They want their kids to come to school, but they want to be safe because they have their families, they have their lives as well. And so I think those professionals in the school system really sorting all this out as we look to the new school year, to me, I'm hoping will campaign hard to, have people vaccinated. And even though if they can't, as you pointed out, Stephanie, change infrastructure on a larger scale, they can do, small things to mitigate the spread. Cleaning, mask wearing, because you don't know who is going to be true to the honor system in terms of who got a vaccination, who didn't, so the mask thing to me is still a big deal. It's an easy thing, really, but it has been made such a big deal for many to just put it on. I've just noticed wearing it that, colds have gone down, flu has gone down. So it has its positives. But I think, my assessment would be it's just going to have to be patience.
Yeah.
When we're adjusting to things, and now we're adjusting back, you just have to have patience. Nothing's going to be perfect. And I like what you said about listening. Parents, please, if you're listening to our podcast, listen to your students. Don't put that pressure on them because it was a hard year. And now they're easing their way back into school. And, nobody wants to fail. I think I say that like this because it's just a ridiculous notion. Nobody wants to fail, but there are all these extenuating circumstances that caused kids to not do well. and not pass their grade. So if you've got to take a grade again, be supportive, be that ear. I like that, Stephanie. That's really good advice. How about you, Danielle?
I'm thinking that everything that Stephanie is saying is really good advice. As we've already said, this is a very complex, challenging situation that we're in. And Wendy, I like how you said, let's just have patience throughout the transition. Stephanie, before we go, though, is there one more piece of advice that you could even give our therapists? And then I'm going to sum it up. Because there are a lot of gems for today. But what are some last bit of advice as we're approaching the new school year, even for your colleagues and for other therapists?
I think I would say to my therapist colleagues to give some psychoeducation to parents and say some of the things that we've talked about, because parents can be sometimes kind of narrow-minded, and you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to do that, you're supposed to do that. But we as therapists know that there is a continuation. It's a scale, and it's a spectrum. And all of the students that we talk to are not the same. They all have different feelings and approaches. So if parents could be very flexible and kind and considerate to their student, and know that, as Wendy mentioned, this has been a complex situation that none of us ever imagined, none of us have ever experienced. It's just new and different. And so we have to be flexible and open-minded. So as therapists, we can help our parents in family sessions maybe to talk about some of these issues and get some new perspective.
Absolutely. Well, Miss Stephanie, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I just want to kind of summarize what we have talked about. I think we've talked about a lot, but some advice that was given on today really centers around self-care, and also really centers around the awareness that we do have to be patient. This is a very complex time. And as Stephanie said, consider and extend kindness and compassion to everyone as we transition into the new school year. And so from the student perspective, Stephanie talked about assisting clients or students with the acceptance of their school performance, whether they have to repeat a grade or how they are going to approach this new year as they're transitioning back into school. Just like they had to transition from not going to school and not seeing their peers on an everyday basis, there is going to be a new transition and adjustment period that we kind of have to extend to our young ones. When it comes to the parents, be okay with easing back the children into school. Allow them to be able to adjust and use any type of coping skill that is provided in therapy or through the school system. And for our teachers, really being able to mentally prepare for being physically back into the school, whether it be because of the infrastructure and the physical space, or shifting how you teach, whether it be hybrid, whether it be all in school or still online. Allowing yourself and extending yourself a little bit of grace to get comfortable with that. And then lastly, for our therapists, and I think, Stephanie, this was really important, something that you said, providing psychoeducation to our parents and to our caregivers so that they can understand how the flow or understand how the adjustment of our students, our young ones, our clients will go. And so, Stephanie, again, we want to just thank you for all of these gems that you've provided for us today. Wendy, would you happen to have any last thoughts? And after your thoughts, can you let us know what's coming up?
Sure. Thanks, Danielle. So, Stephanie, yes, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today as we tackle this subject matter. Danielle and I had talked about this quite a bit these last few months, and we felt like this was something that needed to be discussed as schools resume opening in August and in the fall. So hopefully our audience can take away some good knowledge from this discussion and apply it to their own families and their children. So coming up, we're going to talk more about COVID-19 and education and what happened. We're going to get more perspectives from different people in the education system as we continue this series through the month of August. So that's what's coming up, Danielle.
All right. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much again for joining us. I'm your host, Danielle Young, with my host, Wendy Grier. This is ABH's podcast, Making a Difference in Mental Health, where we're always striving to make a difference in mental health. We will see you next time.